he was leaving the market, until he saw the last cage and said, "I'll take her." The market was almost empty. The bright lights that had lit the place all day were now dim and flickering. Vendors packed away their goods, pulling down cloth covers and locking up metal boxes. The air smelled of dust, rust, and something sharp, like burnt oil. It had rained earlier, and the ground was wet and muddy, reflecting the neon signs above in broken shapes. Jackson walked slowly between the stalls. He carried a small bag of supplies, nothing special, just what he needed for his ship. He had come to buy fuel cells and some spare tools, but he stayed longer, wandering through the maze of shops. It was always like this when he visited an alien trade hub. Strange smells, stranger faces, and things for sale that would shock most humans. The loud voices that had filled the market all day were now gone. Only a few sellers called out weakly, trying to get rid of the last of their stock before night came. Jackson adjusted his jacket and turned toward the exit. His ship was waiting in Dock 9, and he wanted to get back before the next round of rain. Then he heard it. A sound so small and soft, he almost thought it was in his head. It was not a word, not exactly, but a tiny whimper, almost like a child's cry. He stopped. His eyes scanned the dark corners of the market. In the far back, where the shadows covered most of the path, he saw it, a cage. It was old and rusted, the bars bent in places, the lock barely hanging on. A single light bulb swung above it, casting weak yellow light over the figure inside. Jackson walked closer, without really knowing why. Inside, sitting, with her knees pulled to her chest, was a small alien girl. Her skin was pale silver, her hair dark and tangled, her eyes huge and shining even in the dim light. She wore a torn cloth dress that barely covered her. Her thin arms wrapped around herself, and a chain around her ankle connected her to the floor of the cage. Jackson frowned. She looked no older than 12 in human years, but there was something strange in her gaze, something old, like she had seen far more than her small frame should have. A tall, thin alien stepped forward from behind the cage. His long fingers tapped the bars as he gave Jackson a slow smile. "Not interested," Jackson said quickly. He wasn't in the mood to get involved. The seller tilted his head. "She is all that's left. Human. Last one today." "I'm not," Jackson started. But then the girl looked up at him. Her eyes met his. There was no begging in them. No tears. Only fear. And something else. It was a silent plea. A whisper without sound. Jackson took a step back. But he couldn't look away. "Why is she here?" he asked slowly. The seller shrugged. "Useless. No skill. Bad luck. Cursed maybe. No one will take her." Jackson felt his chest tighten. He didn't believe in curses, but he had seen enough in the galaxy to know people would believe anything if it kept them away from trouble. The seller leaned closer to the bars, speaking as if telling a secret. "She's cheap. Take her if you want, but you'll regret it." Jackson turned toward the exit again, but his feet wouldn't move. In his head, a voice told him to leave. He didn't need this. He was just a trader, not a rescuer. But another voice, quieter yet stronger, told him he couldn't. Walk away. The market was nearly silent now. He reached into his coat, pulled out a few credits, and held them out. "I'll take her," he said. Every head in the nearby stalls turned. The seller blinked, then laughed. "As you wish, human." The sound of the locks snapping open echoed through the empty rows. The girl didn't move at first. It was as if she didn't believe she was free. Jackson crouched and held out his hand. After a long moment, she placed her small, cold fingers in his. They walked out together. The seller's voice followed him, soft but sharp. "Remember my words, human. You'll regret this." Jackson didn't answer. The girl stayed silent, her bare feet making no sound on the wet ground. The city air outside the market was cold, filled with distant engine hums and the low growl of alien traffic. He glanced down at her. She kept her head low, holding tightly to his jacket. Somewhere deep inside, Jackson felt the heavy weight of a choice he didn't understand yet. But far behind them, in the shadows, someone watched. A pair of glowing eyes followed their steps until they vanished into the night. The watcher whispered a word that was lost in the wind, and then melted back into the darkness. The night air wrapped around them like cold smoke as Jackson led the girl through the narrow back streets. The market's noise was gone, replaced by the steady drip of rainwater from metal rooftops. She walked close, her small hand still gripping his jacket like it was the only thing keeping her upright. He didn't ask her name, not yet. He wasn't sure if she would answer. And there were too many eyes in the shadows. More than once, he felt the prickling sensation of being watched. A quick glance over his shoulder showed nothing but empty alleys and flickering signs. Still, his instincts told him they weren't alone. When they reached his ship in Dock 9, a pair of alien port guards stood at the ramp. Their uniforms were marked with a symbol Jackson didn't recognize, a dark circle with sharp lines cutting through it. One guard stepped forward, his eyes scanning the girl, before landing on Jackson. "You bought her from the market?" the guard asked, his voice heavy with suspicion. Jackson kept his tone flat. "I did. Is there a problem?" The guard's gaze lingered on the chain still hanging from her ankle. Then he smirked. "Not yet, but there will be." They stepped aside without another word. But Jackson knew the conversation wasn't over. He guided her inside quickly, sealing the ramp behind them. Inside the ship, the girl looked around like every wall might bite her. She stayed near the door, her bare feet leaving tiny drops of water on the floor. Jackson set his bag down and motioned toward the small galley table. "Sit," he said, trying to sound less like a soldier and more like whatever she needed right now. She didn't move. Her eyes darted from corner to corner, like she was mapping the place for escape routes. Jackson sighed and went to the storage unit, pulling out a clean blanket when he draped it over her shoulders. She flinched at first, then slowly gripped it tight. Hours passed. The ship's quiet hum was broken only by the faint scratching sound coming from the corner where she sat. Jackson was in the cockpit running pre-flight checks when the noise became louder. He turned. The girl was sitting cross-legged on the floor, her head bowed, whispering something over and over in a language he couldn't understand. Her voice was soft, but the words had a strange rhythm, like a chant. For a moment, he thought the shadows on the wall behind her were moving, bending unnaturally with her whispers. Then she stopped suddenly and looked straight at him. Her eyes seemed darker than before, and for a second, Jackson thought he saw a faint glow deep within them. Neither of them spoke for the rest of the night, but when Jackson finally tried to sleep, he dreamed of eyes watching him through the hole. When he woke, the ship's alarm was flashing a quiet warning. Dock 9 had been locked down, and an official notice blinked on his screen. His ship was being held for inspection. He didn't need to guess why. Before he could react, the ship shook violently. The lights flickered, and distant explosions echoed through the bay. The girl appeared in the doorway of the cockpit, her blanket still around her. She didn't look surprised. Her voice was calm, almost cold, as she spoke one word in perfect human tongue: danger. The next blast was closer, shaking the walls of the ship like a giant hand had slapped it. Jackson didn't wait for another. He grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her toward the back exit hatch. Outside, the spaceport was chaos, alarms wailing. In the cold air, smoke rising from the far end, where several ships were burning. Figures in black masks were weaving through the crowd, moving with purpose. They weren't looters. They weren't panicked. They were hunting. The girl stayed close, her bare feet silent on the metal floor as they moved. Every time Jackson looked at her, she seemed to calm, like she had seen this before. One of the masked hunters spotted them and shouted something in a language Jackson didn't know. The man raised a weapon. Jackson shoved the girl behind a stack of cargo crates as a shot hissed past his head. He rolled, grabbed a metal rod from the ground, and swung it hard into the attacker's wrist. The weapon clattered to the floor. Jackson hit him again, harder this time, until the man didn't move. The girl peeked out, her eyes wide, but still without tears. "Come on," Jackson said, grabbing her hand and running toward the maintenance tunnels. The main streets were no good. Too many eyes, too many traps. The tunnels smelled of oil and damp stone. The walls narrow and slick under his hands. The sound of boots echoed behind them. Whoever these people were, they weren't giving up. Jackson's heart pounded. He hadn't run like this since his days in the human militia. Every turn they took felt the same shadowed halls, dripping pipes, the constant hum of power lines. Then the girl pulled his arm sharply, pointing down a side passage he hadn't noticed. It was darker, the air colder. He didn't question her. They ran through until the noise of pursuit began to fade. When they finally stopped, both breathing hard, Jackson pressed his back to the wall. "Who are they?" he asked between breaths. The girl hesitated, her small hands clutching the blanket tighter around her. "They want me dead," she said simply, her voice flat. "Why?" Her gaze met his, and for the first time, there was something sharp in her tone. "Because I'm not supposed to be alive." Before he could ask more, a faint blue light flickered ahead of them. The tunnel opened into a hidden chamber filled with strange markings carved into the walls. The girl stepped forward, running her fingers across the symbols like she knew them. Jackson stayed close, the hairs on his arms rising, somewhere deep in the tunnels. The sound of boots returned. The hunters had found their trail again. The girl turned to Jackson, her voice low but certain. "If you want to live, follow me, and don't look back." The blue light from the markings seemed to grow brighter as they moved deeper. It wasn't coming from any machine Jackson could see. It felt alive, pulsing in rhythm with the girl's slow steps. She moved like she had walked these halls 1,000 times before, even though she had been locked in a cage just hours ago. The sound of the hunter's boots faded behind them, replaced by an odd silence. It wasn't the silence of safety. It was heavy, pressing on Jackson's chest, making each breath feel too loud. The girl finally stopped in front of a large circular door carved with the same glowing symbols. Her small hand touched the center, and the metal shuddered like it recognized her. With a deep groan, the door slid open, revealing a chamber that looked older than the city above. Jackson stepped in cautiously. The walls were covered in faded murals, scenes of tall, silver-skinned people standing before massive crowds. In one, a child was held high, a crown of light above her head. Jackson looked at the girl, then back at the mural. She didn't meet his eyes. "My name is Sira," she said softly, her voice echoing in the chamber. "I was born to rule a people that no longer exist." Jackson frowned, unsure if she was speaking metaphor or madness. Sira turned toward him, the dim light casting shadows under her eyes. "There was a war," she continued. "My family was betrayed. Our bloodline hunted. Our cities burned." Her fingers brushed the chain still on her ankle. "They thought I was dead. They wanted it that way." Jackson tried to piece it together, if what she said was true. Taking her from the market wasn't just an act of kindness. It was a declaration of war against whoever had taken her throne. "Why were you in that cage?" he asked. Sira's lips tightened. "To keep me hidden. Until they could finish the job," she said. "But now that I am seen, the hunters will not stop." Something inside Jackson twisted. He had survived wars before. He had lost friends and seen planets burn. But there was something about this girl, this quiet, strange survivor, that made him feel like walking away was impossible. "Why tell me all this?" he asked. Sira stepped closer, looking up at him with eyes that seemed older than she was. "Because," she whispered, "you've already chosen my side, even if you don't know it yet." Before Jackson could answer, a low rumble shook the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the blue glow of the walls flickered. Sira's head turned sharply toward the door they had entered. "They're here," she said, her voice calm but urgent. She reached out and grabbed his wrist, her touch surprisingly warm. "Whatever happens next, you cannot let them take me." The rumble grew louder, and Jackson realized it wasn't just footsteps this time. It was the grinding sound of metal tearing against stone. The chamber's entrance split apart, and the shadows moved like liquid as the masked hunters poured in. There were more of them than before, their weapons glowing faintly in the dim blue light. Sarah didn't move, her eyes locked on the leader, a tall figure with armor marked by the same dark circle symbol Jackson had seen on the port guards. The leader's voice was smooth, almost polite. "You've caused us trouble. Human, hand over the girl and walk away alive." Jackson's grip tightened on the metal rod he still carried. His mind told him to find a way out, but his body stepped in front of Sarah without thinking. From the corner of his eye, movement caught his attention, a figure he recognized slipping in through the side. It was Rin, an old trading partner Jackson had known for years. Relief flashed for a moment, but it vanished when Rin didn't come to help. Instead, Rin's gaze slid past Jackson and landed on Sarah, his lips curling in a greedy smile. "You owe me for the last time I saved your skin," Rin said, "so I'll take payment now." The betrayal burned hot in Jackson's chest. He had trusted Rin, and now he understood why the hunters had found them so quickly. Sarah's small hand gripped his coat, but there was no fear in her touch, only steady pressure. The leader nodded at Rin, as if a deal had already been made. Jackson stepped back just enough to block their view of her completely. "If you want her," he said, his voice low and sharp, "you'll have to take her from me." The first shot came from Rin, a flash of red slicing through the air. Jackson shoved Sarah to the floor and swung the metal rod, catching one of the hunters across the helmet. The fight was brutal and close, the chamber echoing with the clash of metal and the hiss of plasma. Sarah stayed low at first, her blanket slipping off her shoulders. Then, as one hunter lunged toward Jackson from behind, she raised her hand. A burst of silver light exploded from her palm, throwing the attacker against the wall so hard the stone cracked. Everyone froze for a heartbeat. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances, and even Rin stepped back. Jackson stared at her, his breathing heavy. What was that? Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the hunters with a gaze so cold it made them hesitate. "They will come again," she told Jackson quietly. "But now they know I'm not helpless." They didn't wait to see if the hunters would regroup. Jackson pulled Sarah toward a hidden exit in the back of the chamber. The tunnel opened into the cold night, the sky above heavy with low clouds glowing faintly from the city's distant lights. The air tasted of metal and dust, carrying the faint scent of rain yet to come. The wastelands stretched ahead, endless ground of cracked stone and scattered metal wreckage from battles long past. Here, there were no safe corners, no walls to hide behind. If the hunters followed, they would see them from miles away. Jackson knew their only hope was to move fast and stay unpredictable. Sarah walked beside him without a word, her eyes scanning the horizon like she was searching for something. She didn't look afraid, if anything. She seemed more certain the farther they got from the city. Finally, she stopped and pointed to a jagged ridge of black stone in the distance. "There," she said, her voice calm. "We can make a stand there." Jackson frowned. "A stand? I thought the goal was to run." Her gaze didn't waver. "We can't outrun them forever, but we can end this." He almost laughed at the idea. She was small, unarmed, and barefoot, but the memory of that silver burst in the chamber silenced him. Something told him she knew more than she had revealed. They reached the ridge, just as the first shadow appeared on the horizon. The hunters were coming, fast and organized. Jackson took cover behind a broken piece of metal, his grip tightening on his weapon. Sarah stood in the open, her bare feet planted firmly on the cold rock. The wind caught her hair, and for a moment, she didn't look like a frightened girl anymore. She looked like someone who belonged here, like the wasteland was her court, and she was its queen. The hunters spread out, surrounding them, their weapons raised. Jackson's muscles tensed, ready to fight until the end. But before he could move, the ground beneath them began to hum. A low vibration rolled through the ridge, and the blue glow from the chamber's symbols seemed to pulse under the rock. Syrah's voice carried over. The wind, speaking in that strange, ancient language again. The air grew heavy, the light brighter, and the hunters hesitated for the first time. Jackson watched as cracks of silver light split across the stone, racing outward like lightning frozen in the ground. Syrah's eyes burned with the same light, her small frame unmoving as the energy built around her. "This is my land," she said, her voice now echoing unnaturally, "and you are not welcome." The silver burst that followed was blinding. When Jackson's vision cleared, the hunters were scattered across the wasteland, some fleeing, others too stunned to rise. She turned to him, her breathing steady, despite the power she had unleashed. "You didn't just save me," she said. "You've saved more than you know." The wind howled across the ridge, carrying the last echoes of the fight into the emptiness. The hunters, who could still move, vanished into the shadows of the wasteland, their black shapes swallowed by the night. Jackson stood slowly, his arms aching, his breath uneven. Syrah remained still, the silver light in her eyes fading to a quiet glow. For a moment, there was only silence between them. The kind of silence that feels too big, like it could swallow whole worlds. Finally, Jackson spoke, his voice rough. "What happens now?" Syrah looked toward the distant horizon, where faint lights flickered, not from the city, but from something far older. "My people will come," she said. "They will hear what happened here, and they will know the bloodline lives." Before Jackson could answer, movement appeared in the darkness. Not hunters this time, but tall figures draped in silver cloaks. Their steps silent on the rock, they bowed to Syrah, their heads low, their voices speaking words Jackson couldn't understand. She stepped toward them, then stopped and looked back at him. "You can leave now," one of the cloaked figures told him, his tone polite but distant. Jackson almost laughed at the idea. He thought about going back to his old life, small trade runs, quiet ports. Nothing more dangerous than a faulty engine. But when he looked at Syrah, wrapped in the cold wind and glowing faintly like she belonged to the stars themselves, he knew the truth. He wasn't going back. Syrah's voice cut through the night. "Come with me." It wasn't a plea, and it wasn't a command. It was simply a path laid in front of him. Jackson stepped forward, and the silver-cloaked figures moved aside to let him through. As they walked into the darkness together, the horizon ahead began to brighten with the pale glow of a new dawn. But far behind them, hidden in the black wastes, a single hunter watched from the shadows. His voice was barely a whisper, carried away by the wind. "The human will ruin everything."